Today is Saturday, June 24th. You could be waiting a long time for new seasons of your favorite TV shows. The writer's strike has been going on for nearly 2 months now. And since negotiations broke down on May 1st, there is no sign of a deal coming soon. Today, we're talking about the standoff between Hollywood's writers and the studios that employ them. We'll discuss the impact on the TV and movies many of us watch and why technology is at the core of these negotiations. Our expert guest is Anusha Sakui. She's a staff writer for the Los Angeles Times who has been covering the strike. She explains the role of streaming platforms and artificial intelligence in Hollywood and how this strike compares to ones in the past. Plus, she shares the impact on local economies all over the world and how long she thinks this strike might last. Welcome to the Newsworthy Special Edition Saturday, when we sit down with a different expert or celebrity every Saturday to talk about something in the news. Don't forget to tune in every Monday through Friday for our regular episodes, where we provide all the day's news in 10 minutes. I'm Erica Mandy. It's now time for today's Special Edition Saturday. Anusha, thank you so much for coming on the Newsworthy.
Thanks for having me on.
So the writer's strike has been going on for almost 2 months now. Can you summarize what the main sticking points between the writers and the studios are at this point?
There were proposals around pay. The WGA wanted more, just in terms of pay increases and also in terms of compensation for when writers' work is on streaming. And also in terms of the regulation of AI, that was one area where it seemed that there was an impasse on the Writers Guild want to regulate the use of artificial intelligence in film and TV.
Yeah, so those are 2 points that I wanted to talk about a little bit more because, let's compare it to the writer's strike in the past. Streaming and AI probably weren't issues. So how would you say those have stood out, and how does this writer's strike compare to the last one?
I think it's really interesting to go back and see how in 2007, 2008, the last writer's strike, they were trying to get ahead of streaming, which at that point, really we were talking about digital downloads. Netflix was only just starting to pivot to the internet from DVDs by mail. Hulu didn't launch until 2008. What writers were concerned with was people were buying TV shows and films through iTunes, and they wanted to make sure that they were getting compensated for when their content was appearing on the internet. But the pandemic really accelerated that shift to streaming, particularly for film, where we saw studios putting films in people's homes much earlier than they would normally, sometimes immediately, making them on offer for a premium price, like Mulan and Black Widow, I think.
And is that just making sure you're getting proper pay and royalties for streaming, or is it more than that?
It's more than just the compensation. It's also the modes of work, the working conditions. When shows are being picked up by networks, traditionally in the past, they would film a pilot and then order a season, and the writers would work on that for 10 months and they would work on 22 to 24 episodes. Today, you're talking about a show that might just be 8 episodes, and you're talking about, 14 weeks of work maybe. What they're finding is that in some cases, they don't feel like they're being paid enough. They're either, not working on enough episodes, or they're not working the same amount, the same period of time, or that they're doing more work than they're really being paid for.
When it comes to AI, we recently saw directors have a contract that included essentially a promise not to replace them with AI. Artificial intelligence, tools like ChatGPT and beyond. Why were directors able to come to an agreement when it comes to AI, and it sounds like maybe writers are not?
I think with directors, they have a lot of leverage. If directors go on strike, if actors go on strike, production stops. With writers, there's more of a lag. So there is incentive for the studios to offer the directors more, potentially. We know that with the writers, they don't want AI-generated material to be the basis of film and TV work, or for their work, as in writers' works, to be used to train AI. So it's really all in the fine print as to what they can secure. And it seemed that from when the talks fell apart on May 1st, the only thing that the writers were offered was an annual meeting to talk about advances in technology, which, some writers described as an insult rather than a proposal.
Do you think even if they are able to come to an agreement this time, that it's sort of delaying the inevitable?
I think there is a question, in Hollywood about putting the genie back in the bottle, as it were, when it comes to AI. You can't sort of avoid the advances of technology. I think the writer's concerns is sort of how it's used. And so, yeah, I don't think they're saying, it can't be used at all, but I think they want strict guidelines on how it can be used.
You mentioned actors as well. SAG-AFTRA is the union that represents actors and other performers. And it sounds like they could also go on strike if a deal isn't reached soon. How likely do you think that is?
It's a very big union. I mean, it's Hollywood's biggest union. It's got 160,000 members. Like the directors, they have a lot of leverage. They've already got permission from their membership to go on strike if they can't get a deal. So they have that in their back pocket. It would be the first strike on this contract for film and TV and since 1980. So it's been a long time since the actors have gone out on strike. And if they do, production around the world could stop. What we've seen during the writer's strike is some efforts to keep production going where they can.
And that's an interesting distinction because writers kind of affect future production, whereas actors and directors could affect production happening now. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. We just put out a story talking about how in LA, scripted TV production has ground to a halt. And that's because probably over the last couple of months, what's happened is that the scripts that were done and ready to be used have probably been used up. And so, a lot of productions have got to the point where they don't have anything left to film and they need the writers. And the other thing is that they faced a lot of aggressive tactics by the writers to picket live productions that are trying to go on and shut them down. There's been a lot of coordination between the unions this time around. We've seen the IATSE, which is the union that represents crafts like hairdressers, costumers, riggers, grips. They, and along with the Teamsters, have said that they won't cross picket lines effectively. So that's what we've seen just, small groups of writers be able to shut down productions in coordination with these other unions. Writers have been very effective at being able to shut down production, but it's not the same threat as actors, because if you don't have the actors, if you don't have a director, you can't shoot anything.
So what does this all mean for the fall TV season? Which top shows are already seeing delays? We'll get into that next. But first, a quick break for our sponsors. Have you ever experienced waiting weeks or even months to get into a doctor's appointment, and then when you're finally there, it feels like the doctor just brushes you off? That can be maddening and a waste of time. A doctor should be listening and guiding you and prioritizing your care. And that's why I like to do a little research before choosing a new doctor. Well, ZocDoc is one of my go-to places to find quality doctors because they have real patient reviews listed and they make it easy to search for only those who take your insurance. And it even lets you schedule and book right then and there. In fact, ZocDoc is the only free app that lets you find and book doctors who are patient-reviewed, take your insurance, are available when you need them, and treat almost every condition under the sun. Finding great care should not take up all of your time and energy. Go to ZocDoc.com/newsworthy and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then find and book a top-rated doctor today. Many are available within 24 hours. That's ZocDoc.com/newsworthy. ZocDoc.com/newsworthy. Okay, now back to our conversation. So, at least for the current writers' strike that's ongoing, what does that mean for some of our favorite shows? You said some have shut down. What shows are really standing out right now that can't move forward?
Well, for example, Stranger Things, the creators of that show said early on, actually, in the strike that they wouldn't continue working. So that might delay the release of the next season. I've also seen writers from, the popular show Abbott Elementary say that they were due to start working on the next season when the strike started. And obviously they're not going to do that. And that might mean not only a delay to the next season, but potentially fewer episodes. And, and a lot of what we're expecting this fall on TV to be reality TV and repeats, basically.
It's been reported that production companies have been trying to rein in their budgets after years of spending a lot of money to expand their streaming capabilities. With that in mind, can the studios actually afford to match what the writers are asking for? And what's the writers', take on that as well?
So that's part of the big argument, is that we have seen this year some of the studios deal with the losses on streaming. Many have done layoffs. I mean, look, we've seen Disney cut 7,000 workers in a bid to improve their balance sheet and costs. It is a tough time for the studios, but the WGA seemed to know that that was going to be a point of argument and put out very early on what they saw as some data that really countered that narrative. So they showed that over a long period of time, like the past decade, that the studios have been very profitable, and that they showed that, in 2023, that the studios were planning to invest something like $19 billion in streaming. So we still do see a big focus on streaming and money going into it. The studios, obviously, they've said that they want to make a fair deal, but they don't think that they can afford or want to pay. I think it was over $400 million a year is what the deal with the WGA, as they propose it, would be. And so there's a big gulf there, or at least at the time that the talks fell apart. So question is when they will go back to the table, because there haven't been any talks since May.
And so at this point, how long is it looking like this strike could last?
It really depends what happens with SAG-AFTRA. I think the AMPTP is focused, it seems, on getting on its negotiations with the actors. And, if they go on strike, it would delay, them being able to return to the table with the writers. It's going to be a little while, I think. We're past 50 days. A question if it goes on to the same sort of 100 days that the 2007, 2008 strike went on. But that's the big question. How long it goes on, no one can tell.
And during a strike, I mean, those writers are not getting paid, I imagine.
No. And, it's not just writers being affected. Obviously, cast and crew are affected from productions that are being shut down. And we've seen different efforts to raise money for those affected. But also, it's affecting local businesses. We know in 2007, 2008, that the strike, when at the time was obviously very localized to Southern California, it cost the local economy at the time $2.1 billion. And they're already specialists that think that it could cost a lot more now. But also, this industry is spread across the world today. So there are huge filming hubs in Georgia, New York, New Mexico, and around the world. The UK, Australia, parts of Europe, are very popular hubs for filmmaking.
And so all of those economies could be impacted as the cast and crew aren't there living, eating, all of those things.
Yeah. And all the businesses that service those productions, prop houses. I was talking to one of LA's biggest prop houses, ISS, about how their businesses have been affected, and they've already had layoffs, and they've been forced to kind of go into other areas like music tours and events to try and keep afloat.
Anything else you want to add, or just a final takeaway for our listeners who are mostly the people watching those shows and movies at home and in theaters?
There's a lot of common points that these creators are fighting for, it seems. And one of the biggest ones is that they struggle to make a living in a sort of, what they would call a sort of a middle-class existence, that is becoming out of reach for many writers and performers, and that it's not necessarily the glamorous, rich existence that people expect.
Well, thank you again to LA Times staff writer Anousheh Schoui for joining us today. For more of her reporting on the strike and other major developments in the entertainment industry, check out the link in today's episode notes. We'll link to many of her stories from the LA Times. We're also bringing you any major new developments during our regular weekday episodes. Our 10-minute news roundups are available every Monday through Friday starting at 4 a.m. Eastern. So we'll be back on Monday. Until then, have a great weekend.